Today I'm sitting here with Stéphane Brabant. Stéphane is an alumnus of the ANU College of Law, and we're very excited as he is back visiting us after 37 years away working as an international lawyer in both business and human rights. So, Stéphane, the first thing I'd like to ask you is, how did you end up studying here those 37 years ago when you were a young French lawyer?
Ah, what a story. What a story. Indeed, I was young.
Yeah.
And it was, that's a long story. I tried to cut it short. In fact, in France, we had, when I was about 22, 23 years old, we had to go to the military service.
Yes.
But instead of that, we could go to some sort of civil service. And I've been asked to go in a former New Hebrides, working for the prosecution department. And
so, Stéphane, the former New Hebrides is Vanuatu.
Vanuatu
as we know of
today,
it,
yeah. And so I went there, and it was at the time of independence. And, long story, I ended up by being deputy of the public prosecutor, and for a few days, even public prosecutor. And you can imagine at 23 years old with long hair and a big mustache, that was... And after the independence, surprisingly, because that was a condominium, so the British and the French went out, and Australian people came in as neighboring country, which makes perfect sense. And in my office one day, there was a lady sitting there, and she was saying, "Well, you're not the prosecutor anymore, this is me." I said, wow. I was surprised. I remained diplomat. And so I left, and then a few days later she called me back and said, "Can you come back, because half of the matters are in French language." I said, "I can come back, but only to teach you the French, because you told me that I was not prosecutor anymore." So I took it, very gently. And the wonderful story is that the High Commissioner for Australia, who was a wonderful man, he realized that there was, a bit of a little issue, I would say. And he said to me, "What are you going to do after New Hebrides?" Since my father was half American, I said, "Well, I intend to go try to study in the US at university, international law." He said, "Stop. No. We have a wonderful new program at ANU, and we do think that it would be really good if you could consider that program. And, we'll make sure that you have a visa, and that of course, legally speaking, everything being in order." And so I said, well, that's a good idea. And so I arrived in Canberra.
Fantastic.
And I attended that beautiful program at ANU.
Fantastic. So it was just a new program when you started?
It was a 3-year-old program, and by chance yesterday, thanks to you, I met with J.P. Fontaine, who was some sort of a creator of that program, and that was lovely. And it was a new program by 3 years old. But as J.P. Fontaine said yesterday, at that time, I can tell you it was very, very, because it was new. So there were many, many things to study from public international politics, law of the sea, international resources law, so many things. That was fantastic.
Fantastic and challenging too, because it was in English and it was a very comprehensive degree.
Indeed. English is not my first language. First from that, because despite my father was half American, he never spoke in English with me. So it was not easy for that, but working hard, and that was lovely. And the environment at ANU was making it so easy. I mean, for me, very different from France, for that the access to library and access to professors was very easy. So I loved it.
And you've gone on and continue to have a very successful career now. You are one of the leading business and human rights lawyers in the world. You're based in Paris with Herbert Smith Freehills. You specialise in Africa. Can you just give us a little story of what your professional life has been like?
Yes, indeed. In fact, what made my life is certainly, well, many things, as all of us, but ANU was a key point, because I studied in English. I studied natural resources law. And when I came back to France, I ended up by going in Africa.
Yes.
And that was very lucky. I became international law lawyer in some private practice. And I ended up by living in Gabon for 7 years.
Fantastic.
And this is where I practiced international resources law in oil and gas and mining. And then I came back after 7 years in France, and I set up that practice with that old law firm, and then Herbert Smith Freehills. Freehills being an Australian law
yes,
firm.
Of course.
So that's the
Great
merger.
link.
So for me, great links. I mean, that's, you know, that's life.
Yes.
And we built up a very strong Africa practice in Paris, in London, and all offices of Herbert Smith Freehills. But Paris was a very, very strong practice. Now, of course, it extended very much to other offices. So the practice is a long established practice with Africa, which is to do indeed with extractive industry and other things. And particularly, this is where I met with Professor John Ruggie and you know, working at the time of Kofi Annan. And this is where I became, you know, member of expert group with John Ruggie for the business and human rights issues. And so I developed that practice of respect of human rights by the business.
And I'm going to just ask you a little question about that, because that is quite an amazing process to have been part of. So perhaps just reflect for us a little bit in maybe how things have changed since the guiding principles were introduced, because it has been a slow process, but it's perhaps gathering momentum now. What would your comment be?
I agree with you that it looks like being a slow process on one side and very fast on the other side. It took 2,000 years, if we after Jesus Christ, to get respect of human rights by the business as being something which is an issue. But we must not forget that, you know, the respect of human rights does exist also through the respect of environment and safety and health. So there are some regulations. It's not a low-free zone. Yeah. But now the process and for the business, because, you know, human rights, you know that better than anyone, is a state issue. But since there are some states which were not taking all the measures to protect the human rights, well, it means taking the right regulation concerning business and not taking necessarily also the right measures for access to justice by the people. It ended up by having that process which has been put in place by Professor Ruggie after interviewing many companies and states and NGOs. And he ended up by those guiding principles, which is, as you know, a process which makes the company to be in a position where they can make sure that they don't only declare, I respect human rights, it goes without saying, but being in a mood where they know and show and can demonstrate that they do respect the human rights. And those guiding principles are made as a process for the companies to implement the respect of human rights. Things have changed, I can tell you, Kate, very much in the mindset of companies. So after, you know, the guiding principle is 2011. We're in 2017. A few years, and in few years, where we were a bit lonely when we started human rights, and now there are thousands of people listening to conferences and debates that yourself you organize, and this is surprising. This is fantastic. I do think that I want to think that the planet is changing thanks to those principles.
Well, Stéphane, we're going to finish, then my last question is how you have found it coming back to ANU after 37 years of wonderful experience, wonderful travel. How has your visit been? How have you found ANU?
Well, first, a lot of emotion, personal emotion. I think when you walk again in the same premises, more or less, where I made so many friends, where I started my life as an international lawyer, thanks to ANU, because I became an international lawyer thanks to ANU. And this is something I could not forget. You know, I was a bit of a lonely, froggy guy at that time. And it was at the time which was very interesting. You know, we didn't have, you know, internet, no mobile telephone, no mails. I mean, you know, I was a long way from home, and it was very interesting. Things were very different. And, you know, walking around, it makes me to remember something is how lucky I've been. Wow. How lucky I've been. And this is something in my life I never forget when I have that sort of luck. There are not many people and students who had the luck I had 37 years ago, which gave me the opportunity to have a very happy life. So I would say thanks to ANU.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, it's been an absolute delight welcoming you back, and we hope to do it again.
Thanks a lot.